Today, we're going to look at the end times. And I almost punted. Like I almost said, nobody answered that question, right? Nobody asked for us to, or somebody else needs to preach this. It's not my favorite subject to talk about because it can be so divisive, right? It can be, everybody's got an opinion on it. And the struggle is that most of the time when people want to know about the end or the end times, they want me to tell them when the end is going to happen, right? They want a date. And if that's what you came for today, you're out of luck. They're looking for a date or a time because they want to know when it is. And the reason they want to know when it is because there are changes they feel like they need to make and they don't want to miss something before that time happens. Here's what I would tell you, right? If you knew the end, the date of the end, and there are changes that you would make, don't wait to make the changes. That's the wrong reason to change, right? The reason to change is because you love Jesus, not because the end is coming. And that's the struggle that we have. You see, if you live differently because time is short, then live differently, right? Do you understand what I'm trying to say? If you would change what you're doing right now because you felt like the Lord was coming tomorrow or a year from now or a month from now or even 5 years from now, if there is something that you would change because of that, then change it. Do it now. Don't wait on that time. You don't wait until you've gotten some kind of date. Make the change now. So, and most of the time, right, I need to lay some groundwork for what I'm going to say because I grew up in the modern evangelical church, and there were some terminologies that I heard and that I used that I don't want to put them aside. I just want I want to give some context for them. So a lot of times when people are talking about the end times or Jesus' return, what they mean is not Jesus coming to earth again. They're talking about the rapture of the church and when are we going to be taken away. Most of the time, that's what they mean, that terminology around the rapture. And so the information that I'm going to share now has nothing to do with the text. So I've got 34 verses to cover in my sermon, and by 2 o'clock, you'll be out of here. And so, I got a lot of information to cover today. But I want to give it in the context that Jesus spoke it. But before I get there, I want to talk about what is the mostly what people talk about when they're speaking about the rapture. So in the 1800s, there was a man that lived during that time. His name was John Nelson Darby. And he was really kind of the originator of what modern rapture theory or modern rapture theology is based upon, especially this pre-tribulation removal of God's people out of the earth. And that's kind of how it's been taught over the years. And so specifically some things he taught were a pre-tribulation rapture. It kind of originated with him, and he was the leader of the Plymouth Brethren. That was kind of where his church background was. In the 1830s, he systematized this theology that we call dispensationalism. Okay, and so what he taught, those things that it included that he taught in the 1800s were things like a secret rapture of the church, like the church is going to be taken away before tribulation and nobody's, gonna know that it's happened. He made this sharp distinction between Israel and the church, like he made them two separate things, very distinct in his teaching. And then he taught a literal futuristic belief of the book of Revelation. That's how he approached it. And his view became popularized, especially in the United States. In the early 1900s, Scofield published a study Bible, I think it was around 1909, and that shaped generations. I'm not gonna ask you to raise your hand because I have one too, if you have a Scofield study Bible. It shaped generations of teachers and preachers, and it predominantly was shaped around Darby's theory or his theology about a rapture. And then later, there were books and movies. So when I was a kid, we had reel-to-reel movies. And I don't have time to explain that to anybody under 30. But we watched movies in church. I can't, now that I think about it, but I only remember one movie ever being shown in church. It was a movie called Thief in the Night. And I don't know how many times in my life I felt like I got saved, but I can guarantee you it was every time that movie was shown, right? And so that, and then Late Great Planet Earth was a book that would have come along that reinforced this. And then we got all of the books in the 90s and early 2000s, Left Behind, that entire series that were built around this concept of a pre-tribulation rapture. So the things, let's talk about a couple of things. One, was the rapture something they talked about before Darby came along? The answer to that is yes, but not like he talked about it, okay? The early church and almost all theologians prior to the 1800s believed in this single return of Christ, right? Not two returns. They believed in a single return to Christ, of Christ, that he was coming back to earth again. So there's really not any debate among theologians about Christ coming back. The debate comes about whether he's coming back twice, right? Whether he's coming back to take us away and then he's coming back to rule and reign, or whether there's a singular time that he comes back to reign. The resurrection and the rapture, or the taking up of believers, is a part of what the church believed, the early church believed. You can see this in things like 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, which is the most often quoted passage, or 1 Corinthians chapter 15. And some of the early church fathers would talk about things like us being taken up, but not secretly and not before tribulation. So that becomes the debate. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit in the message today. So he didn't invent this theology or this theory of being caught up, but his emphasis was on a pre-tribulation taking away of the church. And so here, some of you are going to ask me, I know I'm going to get a text or an email, was he wrong? Here's the answer. I'm not here to try to clarify whether he's right or he's wrong. What I'm here to do is say that is a more recent belief system in the general church. It is something in the last 200 years or so. And when you look at the whole of the 2,000 years, many of the earlier church taught something different. Now, what I'm after today is to talk about a passage where Jesus talks about all of those things, every one of them. And I want to do it in the order that Jesus talked about them, and hopefully give us some understanding. And because one of the things, and I have friends, I have to call them friends because they are my friends. I have friends who I believe try to scare people out of hell and scare it out of them, right? I have friends that do that. I do not believe that end time teaching is meant to produce fear. I believe it's meant to produce faithfulness. I believe the intent is not to scare the church. It is to cause us to want to serve God more fully. And that's what I hope I can do today with my message. So I've got 4 specific lanes I want to talk about because I think Jesus kind of addresses 4 different things in this passage. We're going to be in Mark chapter 13, and we're going to look beginning in verse 3. So the first thing I want to talk about is the beginning of the end, or the signs of trouble. And so Jesus here is speaking not in headlines, but he's speaking in terms of what is going to happen. And I mentioned I have some friends that I think they're headline preachers. And what I mean by that is whatever the headline of the news is, that's what you're going to hear about on Sunday. And it's going to be shaped in a way to get you to respond in a particular way. I'm not telling you current events aren't important. I'm telling you they're not nearly as important as we make them. Okay? All right, so let's talk about what the signs are. Jesus begins in verse 3. He says, later, Jesus sat on the Mount of Olives across the valley from the temple. Peter, James, John, and Andrew came to him privately and asked. So I want you to notice who here is. It's 4 people, 4 of the apostles. They come to Jesus and they're asking him a question. Tell us, When will all this happen? What sign will show us that these things are about to be fulfilled? So let me just stop right here and point out that the 4 disciples who had seen Jesus walk on water, raise the dead, right? They're going to see everything he does. They're no different than all of us in this room. When is it going to happen? And can you tell us the signs to look for so we know what's going to take place? Jesus replied, "Don't let anyone mislead you, for many will come in my name, claiming I am the Messiah. They will deceive many, and you will hear of wars and threats of wars, but don't panic. Yes, these things must take place, but the end won't follow immediately. Nation will go against nation, will war against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There will be earthquakes in many parts of the world as well as famines. But this is only the first of the birth pains, with more to come. When these things begin to happen, watch out. You will be handed over to the local councils and beaten in the synagogues. You will stand trial before governors and kings because you are my followers. But this will be your opportunity to tell them about me. For the good news must first be preached to all nations. But when you are arrested and stand trial, don't worry in advance about what to say. Just say what God tells you at that time, for it is not you who will be speaking, but the Holy Spirit. A brother will betray brother to death. A father will betray his own child, and children will rebel against their parents and cause them to be killed. And everyone will hate you because you are my followers, but the one who endures to the end will be saved. So Jesus, they said, what are the signs? What do we need to look for? And then Jesus gives them this long list, and he gets about halfway through, and he says, when you see this, right, it's not the end, there's more to come. Like, it's gonna get worse before it gets better. And he tells us things. He says there are gonna be false claims of Messiah, right? And just in case you're wondering, right, they had messiahs back then. There are still people today who claim to be the Messiah. We were in Israel almost exactly 2 years ago, May of 2023. And there is a popular person now in the nation of Israel who claims to be the Son of God. They claim to be the Messiah. And there are billboards and posters all over Jerusalem telling you how to meet him, telling you how to follow him, all of those things, right? He is a modern Messiah. So that's not something that just happened back then. They are still present today. He said, be careful of false messiahs. He said, be careful of the deception of many, that many people are going to be deceived. He said, nation warring against nation, earthquakes and famines. He said, you're going to be handed over to the government. And then he says, you're going to be beaten in synagogues. So religion, you're not just going to be persecuted by those outside of, let me say the church, because at that time the synagogues were the church, what they knew. That's where they gathered to worship, the Jewish people did. And he said, you're going to be beaten in the synagogues. He says, you're going to stand before governors and kings. But he says, when you stand before governors and kings, it's going to be an opportunity for you to evangelize. He said, it's an opportunity at that moment to tell people about Jesus. And I just want to say, some of the situations that you get put in that look like persecution or oppression are opportunities for you to talk about the Lord, right? The reason why you're there is so that you can express your faith and the people can hear about your faith. He says the good news is going to be preached to all nations, and we live in a time when that is possible, right? That hasn't always been possible throughout history. As a matter of fact, I would say that has become available in my lifetime, where it is easily available to all nations. All nations are going to be able to hear the gospel preached. But he says brother is going to betray brother. Fathers are going to go against their children. He says children are going to turn on their parents to the point of killing them. And he says people are going to hate you. And I just want to say right here, one of the mistakes we make is pretending like we can find some lane that everybody's going to love us. They're not. You can't, if you want to make everybody happy, get an ice cream truck. I know some folks who don't like ice cream, and they're not going to like you, right? You can't. He says people are going to hate you. But the last verse, and I'm going to come back to this another time because it's been rolling around in my spirit for I don't know, maybe 60 days as I kind of wrestled with things. The last piece of this verse, he says, but the one who endures to the end will be saved. Not the one who confesses with his mouth, not the one who believes in his heart, not the one who does anything else, the one who endures to the end. What does that mean? Right? I think there are some implications here. Why? Because following Jesus was never intended to be some easy stint. It was never intended to be some passive situation where nobody attacked you and nobody oppressed you and nobody hurt you and nobody challenged you. There is an endurance factor that comes with following Jesus. And we can't discount that. He says, pay attention to the times. And he says, no matter what the times are and no matter how difficult they get, the key is to endure to the end. But then it's going to get worse, right? So we go from the end times to this great distress or a time of tribulation. And, you know, we can have debates about whether you believe in a pre-tribulation taking away of the church, a mid-tribulation, a post-tribulation. And I mentioned most of the scholars in the early church did not believe that the church was going to escape tribulation, okay? Here's what I'm going to tell you. That in this passage, as Jesus tells this story, he talks about end times, tribulation, coming of the Lord, and then he tells us what to do. So let's read it, okay? The great distress. He goes on to say this, says later, it says, the day is coming when you will see the sacrilegious object that causes desecration standing where he should not be. Reader, pay attention. Then those in Judea must flee to the hills. A person out on the deck of the roof must not go down into the house to pack. A person out in the field must not return even to get a coat. Can I tell y'all something funny right here? In the first service, I was reading this, and I shouldn't be reading with my glasses on. I know that's weird to all of y'all. I have single lens glasses. I have better than 20/20 vision reading, so I'm fine. I do this so I can see the expression on y'all's faces and when you go to sleep, okay? But I'm reading with my glasses on, and I got to this verse, a person out in the field must not return, and I paused because my eyes were seeing goat. And my brain said, I've never read that they couldn't go out in the field and get a goat, right? I was like, I was stumped. So I paused and I had to look at it twice. And I was like, oh, it says get a coat. Okay, I remember that part, right? The goat piece was throwing me off. It says, how terrible it will be for pregnant women and for nursing mothers in those days. And pray that your flight will not be in winter, for there will be greater anguish in those days than any time since God created the world. And it will never be so great again. In fact, unless the Lord shortens that time of calamity, not a single person will survive. But for the sake of his chosen ones, he has shortened those days, okay? So he's talking about all of these tribulations that are going to happen. And he says, if the Lord allows it to continue, everybody's going to die. He says, but for the sake of his chosen ones, he shortens the days. And he goes on, he says, for the sake of his chosen ones, he has shortened those days. Then if anyone tells you, look, here is the Messiah, or there he is, don't believe it. For false messiahs and false prophets will rise up and perform signs and wonders so as to deceive, if possible, even God's chosen ones. Watch out, I have warned you about this ahead of time. He says there's going to be greater anguish during this time than at any other time in history. He says you need to be prepared for yourself. He says for your sake, the days are being shortened. He says, but don't allow the tribulations to cause you to follow a false Messiah. Why? Because when we're in trouble, right, when you have distress in your life, it is the easiest time for you to be deceived. Right? People get taken advantage of more in times of distress than in any other time. Why? Because if you have all of your faculties and you have a clear mind and everything's fine, then you can make wise decisions. When you don't, right? When life is pressing in on you, it is difficult to make wise decisions, and so you make foolish decisions. And he says, be careful as things press in on you. He says, be careful not to follow the wrong thing. You see, we can become so desperate that we'll believe anything. And he tells us, don't be fooled, right? And he even says they'll perform signs and wonders. right? Miracles, things that we attribute to the power of God. He said they will perform some signs and wonders, trying to, if they possibly can, to deceive even God's chosen ones. He says, watch out, I've warned you. I've warned you to be careful about this times. In times of great deception, discernment is your survival. And the thing we have to be careful about is that we don't allow tribulation times to hinder our endurance. And I know it's easy, like sometimes you get tired of it, right? You've had enough. And you're overwhelmed by all of the difficulties that you face, right? You would like to have a day where you could breathe. You want to have a moment where you can just exhale and say, man, it would sure be easy if whatever, and those are vulnerable moments where we are easily distracted and deceived to follow something that we shouldn't. It is even more important during those times to endure to the end. Why? Because the enemy wants to deceive us with what is happening around us. Then after that, he talks about the end times and this great distress. But he goes on now to talk about his glorious return, that Christ is coming again. And it doesn't matter whether you believe there's a taking away, one time Jesus comes and then at a later time he comes back, or you believe it's just a singular event. Frankly, that's irrelevant. For the most part, everybody agrees that Jesus is coming again. How? Doesn't really matter. When? Doesn't really matter. We just have to settle in our hearts that Jesus is coming again. And he goes on to say this in verse 24. He says, at that time, after the anguish of those days, the sun will be darkened, the moon will give no light, the stars will fall from the sky, and the powers in the heavens will be shaken. Then everyone will see the Son of Man coming in the clouds with great power and glory. And he will send out his angels to gather his chosen ones from all over the world, from the farthest ends of the earth. So he says, Jesus is coming again. And it begins in verse 24. He says, at that time. We spend way too much time worrying about when at that time is. Right? Some of you today would like me to come and say, well, it's going to be whatever. 88 Reasons. He was coming back in 1988. Anybody else read that book, by the way? Y'all are scared to raise your hand. You're like, I don't want nobody to know I read it. I know some of you did. I did, just so you're wondering, like I was living in Greenville. I was in college, and I went to a church there, and we did an entire year of Sunday school on 88 Reasons Why he was coming back in 1988. And then 1989 came, and we studied something else, right? So the at that time is what we get caught up on. That is the thing we don't need to get caught up on. Here's what I'm going to tell you, right? I used to have this question. I don't have this question anymore. I used to wonder, will people know when Jesus is going to come back? The answer to that is yes. It might be a surprise, but it's not going to be a secret. Right? You will know when Jesus returns. Every eye is going to see him. Everybody's going to know. You're not going to be caught off guard and wonder if this is going to happen. He's not going to come as a baby in a manger, hidden in a stall somewhere behind a hotel because they had no room. He's not going to be on a cross between two thieves where people are abusing him and ignoring him. He's going to come back as the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, and every knee's going to bow and every tongue's going to confess that Jesus Christ is Lord. There is not going to be any secret. It might be a surprise, but it is not going to be a secret. The world is not going to go, well, what happened? Right? We are going to know that Jesus Christ has returned, and we have to understand that. And the return of Jesus is not this rescue of the fearful people. It is a coronation of the faithful people. Jesus isn't coming back for a bunch of folks who are afraid and scared and wondering what tomorrow holds. He's coming back it's a coronation of people who have been faithful to him, who follow. I grew up on songs. As a matter of fact, before I came out here in the first service, I have a redback hymnal on my shelf, and I pulled it down and I just flipped through some of the songs, because many of those songs were written at the end of the 19th century and early 20th century by Pentecostal people who were broke and and poor and couldn't read and couldn't write. And the hope that they had was that one day Jesus was going to come and take them away. And they would write songs like, I'm going to take a trip on the old gospel ship, and when the roll is called up yonder, I'll be there, and just over in the glory land, and oh, our Lord is coming back to earth again. Those are the songs I grew up on because there were people who believed that Jesus was going to come back. Now listen, what we have to be careful about, I don't want to get too caught up here because I won't finish in time, but what we have to be careful about is that we don't sing so many songs about Jesus coming here, we forget he's coming back, right? He is coming again, and we have to be ready for him to come again. But what was the last thing that Jesus said, right? So he tells them there's going to be signs. He tells them there's going to be tribulation. He tells them that he's going to come back. So what are his final instructions, right? What is it he's trying to say to us through all of this? I don't think Jesus was trying to tell them when it's going to happen. I really don't think Jesus was going to tell them how it's going to happen. I think Jesus was trying to tell them to be prepared when it does happen, right? So he goes on to say this. He says, now learn a lesson from the fig tree. When its branches bud and its leaves begin to sprout, you know that summer is near. In the same way, when you see all these things taking place, you can know that his return is very near, right at the door. Tell you the truth, this generation will not pass from the scene before all these things take place. Heaven and earth will disappear, but my words will never disappear. However, no one knows the day or hour when these things will happen. Not even the angels in heaven or the Son himself. Only the Father knows. And since you don't know when that time will come, be on guard. Stay alert. The coming of the Son of Man can be illustrated by the story of a man going on a long trip. When he left home, he gave each of his slaves instructions about the work they were to do, and he told the gatekeeper to watch for his return. You too must keep watch. For you don't know when the master of the household will return in the evening, at midnight, before dawn, or at daybreak. Don't let him find you sleeping when he arrives without warning. I say to you what I say to everyone, watch for him. Jesus says, we don't know. He says, the angels don't know. I don't know. Only the Father knows, right? And since we don't know, then what is our obligation? He says our obligation is to stay on guard and to stay alert. And then he gives this illustration of what to do. He says this master goes away and he gives these assignments for the people to do, the work for them to do. And he says they are to keep watch for his return and don't let him find you sleeping. Watch for him. Our responsibility is to be about the business that he has given us to be about, to complete the work that he has given us, to be intentional about doing the things that he has called us to do, and not be consumed about a when or a how, but are we faithful, right? Let me say it like this. End times readiness is not about looking for signs. It's about being on assignment. It is about doing what God has called you to do with purpose, to fulfill the thing that he has designed you and created you for in this moment. And I think that is one of the greatest things we can learn, right, about this. My obligation is to be watching and be ready. As a matter of fact, in the military, one of the greatest reprimands that you can give is to fall asleep on watch, right? I mean, there's a lot of things you can do that are just a slap on the wrist. You fall asleep on watch, that's a bad day. Why? Because they're depending on you. That is your assignment. Jesus said, watch and work, watch and work, watch and work. We have to be busy doing the assignment that God has called us to do. If you wanted me to tell you what you should be praying for in these last days, it is not a sign that you could see to know when his coming is. It is not relief from the tribulation that you are facing. It would be to pray, God, give me clarity on what it is you want me to do right this minute. What is it that you have designed me to do? God, what have you called me to do? What is my assignment? Not what is the sign, what is my assignment? How can I be faithful today? Lord, what have you called me to do today? And I would tell you that the closer you get to Jesus, the clearer that assignment gets. In the last 90 days, I talked about it on a podcast this week, I have become so clear about something that I had never seen in a particular way before, that I know, this is part of my assignment and I have to do it. I understand now why I did certain things, and most of the time it was by accident, right? It wasn't intentional. But now that it's clear to me, I've got to be intentional about it. Why? Because the end is near, and I have to watch, and I have to pray, and I have to fulfill the assignment that God has given to me. He says, I say to you, what I say to everyone, watch for him. Across all four of these things, across the signs of the end times, the tribulation, the return, and the preparation, right? The making sure we're prepared. There is this common theme. And the common theme is don't be deceived. Don't be panicked. But don't be passive, right? Be faithful. Stay hopeful. And stay watchful until the King returns. Will you stand? Let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, I thank you today for the power of your word. Thank you for the promise that Jesus will return again. We will rule and reign. God, I pray that you would help us in this room as we struggle through things that look like signs of your return, and tribulations and trials that seem to be coming against us on a regular basis. God, I pray that you would help us to be watchful and hopeful for your return, but more importantly, God, help us to be faithful. God, I pray that we would live on assignment every second, every moment, every hour, every day, every week, every month, every year. God, I pray that we would experience clarity like we've never had before about what you would have us to do and what you have assigned us to do, wherever it is, whether it's in the marketplace, on our job, whether it's our assignment in our family, whether it's our assignment in ministry. God, whatever that is, wherever you have assigned us, God, help us to do it with clarity and power, and help us to endure it.